Hi, I'm Chris, founder of Rebel Commerce Solutions, growth partner to startups helping fearless entrepreneurs expand to new markets and customers. Today's episode is called Breaking Financial Barriers, PingMe's mission to democratize banking in Africa. And I'm delighted to introduce Rob Hiff, VP of Growth at PingMe, a startup that aims to democratize digital finance for 3 billion people by helping financial institutions and enterprises leverage machine learning ready data in emerging markets. Rob, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're welcome. It's great to have you. You've got a really interesting story. I can't wait to tell viewers about it. So tell everybody where you are today and kind of how your day started.
Yeah, so I'm in Nairobi, Kenya right now. Started off the day actually just with a walk down the street. Got that morning sun. And then actually visited a few cafes, doing a bit of remote work today, and some deep work. So finding spots with a good Wi-Fi connection, uh, and doing some calls and all that jazz. So pretty standard day when we're not at client sites, visiting banks, visiting our clients in person. But yeah, Nairobi's a great place to be cafe hopping, and the cafe culture here is really one that I admire.
Super cool. I would love to hear how you so you're from Canada, but you're living and working in Nairobi. How did this transition come about? What's the story there?
Yeah, so my background I say is always in international relations, global development. I was a UN nerd, and dreamt to go and work for the UN. Had the opportunity to do so at one point through a summer internship. And at the same time, because I've always been interested in global development, I've also been interested in just emerging technologies, things like that. I actually ended up doing my MBA after working kind of in the public sector and on that career path, and just got really enthralled in the entrepreneurial venture capital technology space. I went to the University of Toronto, and actually started working for a startup accelerator program there called Creative Destruction Labs. They're a global accelerator program for early stage science based ventures. Um, Funny enough, I met a company as they were going through the program. We really hit it off. They were doing some very interesting things in credit scoring, financial inclusion in sub-Saharan Africa. I thought this was a great merge of, my global development, international relations background, and kind of newfound love with tech and entrepreneurship. So ended up joining the company from the accelerator. And as I did was this was infamous 2020, where COVID struck. I think I accepted my offer in April. You know, Exams were canceled in March. So it was an interesting non-graduation and starting right into like the tech world and working for a startup virtually. So virtually worked for the company for about 2 years. In the early days, did a lot of the market mapping. Which markets do we want to go towards? Who needed financial data infrastructure? Who are going to be our first customers? What was the market size, right? Because you have to give that case to investors as well. And that was a lot of my earlier work. And then I think the moment we were, everyone flirted with travel in their own way as we were coming out of COVID. My first opportunity was in November 2022. We had a team here in Kenya, and I had been working with them virtually, working with clients virtually for 2 years, and just needed to get out of, the Toronto house and make the move. So yeah, landed in Nairobi, November 2022. Since I've been back and forth a little bit, but mostly here nearly full time, approximately 80% of the year. Um, and yeah, it just makes sense to be where your customers are, and you get a much better feel for these markets when you are in them, just like any market globally.
What a great story. And yeah, it's interesting hearing other people's experiences during COVID. So during COVID, I moved from California, from the Bay Area to Austin in January 2020, and I was working for ShipStation, all excited to get to know my team and be in the office and get in the mix. And then February, COVID hit, everybody gets sent home, and I was working remote as well. So yeah, it's always interesting hearing how people and businesses were affected during that period that we used
Mm.
to literally talk about in every single conversation, and now we don't necessarily anymore.
Yeah, it's like it didn't happen, which I like. Let's keep pretending that happened.
Let's do it. So before we get into the Pygmy's business model and product, you also mentioned previously to me that you take part in ultra running um, in Africa, and that's really interesting to me because when I think about ultra running and long distance running, the first athletes I think of are Kenyan athletes. Like they always used to win like the 10,000 meters in the Olympics by a mile. So I'm really interested to kind of hear your story about this
Yeah.
experience.
I mean, I might have oversold myself on call number one with my ultra running record. I've never run an ultra for the record. I've ran in an ultra race. So yeah, running culture here is huge. You have a 10, home of the champions, where a lot of the best runners of the world train. People come from all around the world to go and train with the Kenyans. Um, and running at that altitude, that's one advantage that they have on conditioning. But it's also just, Kenyans are the best runners in the world. I think it's a well-known fact. Nairobi has a huge running culture, expats and locals for sure. A few marathons, and there's a few that take place actually in the outback. So you have like over 30 national parks, I think, in a country that's smaller than Ontario, Canada, where I'm from. And a few of these parks will host races. So there's one I partook in. It was a 50K ultra in Masai Mara, which is just the national parks of national parks when it comes to wildlife, the vastness. And you're running. I did a relay with three friends visiting from Canada. So I only ran 12 and a half K, but I would consider myself a runner. But you're running beside elephants, giraffes, there's helicopters that are hovering above you, trying to make sure that everybody's safe. You sign a waiver that you know
Safe, when you by
makes it feel
safe,
like you're signing.
you mean safe from lions. That I'm just thinking lions right now.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. So you go for the weekend. The race is one day, but all around the race, you're going on game drives as well. So you're going to see lions, see hyenas, cheetahs, all the big five. And then uh, you realize as you're doing that, you start seeing the flags of the track that are kind of in your in your game drive view, and you're like, oh, okay, we were running beside a lion den yesterday. So yeah, it's interesting, but they do a really great job. The parks are so well run in Kenya, and the marshals, I think they have a marshal every kilometer. So if you're running the whole 50K, you have 50 high fives as you're running away from the lions, at least, and they're there to protect you, which is great.
That sounds exhilarating. Wow, I have to visit one day. Maybe I won't do the run. Maybe I'll just sit on the back of a Land Rover or something.
Fun fact as well, though, is Nairobi is the only city in the world that has a national park. So, I said I spent my day at cafes today, but if I wanted to have done a 6 a.m. game drive, I could have driven 20 minutes away and done, a whole adventure to start off the morning, which is pretty excellent, I'll have to say.
Sounds spectacular. Right, should we talk a little bit about the finance industry in Kenya and in sub-Saharan Africa, and what trends you're seeing, and how maybe it differs from um, North America?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll start by saying I think it's almost underestimated just how many similarities there are. I think I was saying to you on a previous call, a bank is a bank is a bank, and and what I mean by that is banks everywhere really operate in, you know, fundamentally the same way. They manage risk, they hold deposits of a market, they're really critical to the financial system. Here in Kenya, I'd say it's the same thing. The way that technology comes about, though, in financial services in the different markets in Africa, it's very unique across the board, I'd have to say. When we, Ping Me, as a company, enter a market or think about how we can expand, and I'll talk a little bit about exactly the platform in just a second, we always look at like the critical infrastructure that exists in financial services. So, what are the government-led programs, whether that's identity systems, government databases, for end customers? What's the central bank like? How advanced are they, and what are the types of regulated entities? Then we also look at, of course, the banks, the major commercial banks, and their commercial arms, but also their retail arms. Um, Everyone goes on and on about the unbanked population in sub-Saharan Africa, and it being about, I think, 55% across the board from what I think I've recently read. And this is true if you're thinking about formal bank accounts and formal banking, but you have to consider all the other ways in which people interact with financial services in these markets. That's not like how I grew up, which is, you turn 16 and you get your first debit card. You turn 18, you get your first credit card. And I think we're at a 97% banked population in Canada. So we look at those two things, and then when we look at other forms of financial services, it's a really unique thing I'm about to say, which is, you know, if you've been in a market that has mobile money, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's basically a concept really founded by a company in Kenya called Safaricom. I think it was mostly a government-owned telco at the time. But they basically founded this concept of mobile money, which enabled people with even a feature phone, so a phone that isn't a smartphone, whether they're on T9 or texting, very, very basic features, to be able to send money to each other with their bank account effectively being their mobile phone number. So if I'm going to a store today, you asked about my day earlier. To pay my bill, I went to the cafe. I asked them for their business number. I opened my Safaricom wallet. It's called M-Pesa here. And I paid through putting in a 6-digit business till number and then putting in my PIN. It's like Verizon owning being the primary transactional network in the US. It wouldn't happen because you guys are so card dominant. Visa and MasterCard really, really, and of course, banks and debit cards have that. But what it's been able to do in Kenya is it brought such a big portion of the consumer population and MSMEs, which is also um, you know, micro, small, medium businesses that really rely on this network. It got them to digitize and also formalize in a way. So when you look at the unbanked statistics today as well, you need to look at, what do you actually consider a bank account? Because on M-Pesa, you can hold a balance, you can transact peer to peer, you can send money to a business, you can, put a down payment, for some goods that you're about to buy that you're about to pick up later. And I'd say the market here as well is really WhatsApp driven. WhatsApp is everyone's first, communication line, and then because your WhatsApp number is your account number, payments and business can be done so easy. So it's a very cool experience in that sense, and I think it's one of the ways Kenya specifically has leapfrogged, traditional financial services. Like Kenya doesn't need Venmo. They don't need. In Canada, we have Interact e-transfer. They don't need it. So don't try to build that here. It just won't fly. So I think it's interesting because so we also when we're looking at emerging markets, because now it's really been the flagship product has been M-Pesa in Kenya, but you look at a lot of emerging markets. India is huge on mobile money, Pakistan, even Latin America, some countries. And a lot of sub-Saharan Africa because they've taken this model. And some of the other major telcos like MTN, Airtel, Vodafone, which actually now owns, or Vodacom, which now owns a stake in Safaricom here in Kenya, are really trying to make that work in other markets. And it's all about, the digitization of these cash societies and that are extremely efficient actually in doing business and microtransactions. And it just it helps kind of formalize and I think stabilize the financial sector. It also then gives the platform where people can then access credit. They can access other things, right? Where um, that might not be as mature as other markets that have had credit for a very, very long time, or at least consumer credit.
So it sounds incredibly convenient, the ability to text and make a payment. And when you think about, all the different apps we have to have and your Venmos that were innovations at the time, like you say, it's almost a leapfrog in its simplicity and convenience to actually be able to pay by text. I think that, but there's something I did want to ask you. So not to go too heavily into the subjects of crypto, but one of the key use cases for Bitcoin is the ability to offer a payment solution to the unbanked population.
Mm.
And I'm a big fan of Jack Mallers and his Strike app. I know what he's trying to do with that. Are you seeing a lot of penetration of or actual usage of crypto payments?
Yeah, so um, crypto is definitely having a moment in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm seeing a lot of companies crop up. And the main use case is actually on like currency stabilization and cross-border payments. Because basically, and store of value for customers that are in markets that are susceptible to these, fluctuations in currency. I'm not a
Yeah,
crypto expert. I've had my waves with believing and non-believing, and I'm definitely looking at the space. I think the biggest challenge when you're in markets where access is so important is, if a market is at a stage where you're trying to, if banking individuals is the challenge, you know, um, and you like ultimately those people are trying to have interoperable payments for what they need. And in many cases, that's very localized for a large portion of the population. I do think, and this is just my hunch, that crypto is kind of still in that, I'd say it's upmarket to the financially included, to the people that have access that can think about, okay, how do I now save with a crypto wallet rather than in my, you know, country's currency, and can crypto give me access to foreign currencies and access to foreign markets? Um, I see that as more of an upmarket solution. Um, but again, not an expert. I'd love a one of my friends. I'll probably meet them later. Who's more in the crypto space to prove me wrong with all the applications. So I'm not gonna. But it is having a moment. So there's traction. There's use cases. And I think as someone who's just been like looking and understanding blockchain for a couple of years now, I've always struggled to see like that mass adoption use case, right? Um, I've heard smart contracts, all of these things, and you know, USDTC and central bank backed digital currencies. Those seem to be pretty good use cases that are now emerging and now are proliferating to even emerging markets. So um, I'm not the expert to go down a crypto rabbit hole, though, if not evident already.
sure. Well, let's watch this space. I think we're all keeping our eye on it. I think many of the big use cases are still to be proven out. So let's see. I wanted to ask you, what is it like as a startup, as a technology business operating in emerging markets?
What is it like? Yeah, I mean, and this is part of demystifying the, you know, technology has been in emerging markets for a very long time. Um, and I feel like technology doesn't really have borders in a lot of senses. Cloud computing really opens this up to, you've actually enabled a whole ecosystem of developers, of techies to actually build digital solutions, even in countries that don't have these large data centers, that don't have, AWS doesn't have a data center necessarily in Kenya. They have partners and their big infrastructures around the world, but cloud computing has opened that up to be possible here. Um, it is interesting because I think there's some technologies here that I think there's some technology platforms that simply don't take into consideration the context of the market that they're in enough. What I mean by that is like you have, Airbnb uh, is actually, they have operations in sub-Saharan Africa. I could Airbnb a condo down the street right now. Is that going to be the best market for Airbnb and the best like tech play? Like, yes, in and around the city of Nairobi, but when you're operating in a market where the consumer purchasing power on 80% of the population isn't in that kind of high income or just, disposable income bracket where these like consumer driven solutions are really able to thrive, I think it's hard. I think like consumer tech is super, super hard. I think it's why a lot of companies go into fintech and financial services because it's actually about providing financial access and strengthening that consumer market. And that's a better case than, trying to get share of wallet for a tech product that isn't necessarily there or available. And that might be a sweeping generalization. I don't mean it to be, but I mean the purchasing power of a market is a key determinant, I think, in, of course, how consumer products are going to be adopted. Um, so, and I think there's a lot of considerations with, when you're putting technology and you're thinking technology first, and you're not actually thinking solution and user consumer first, then that's a problem because then you start kind of implanting a system that you have a thesis that will work because it's technology. Again, this is been my problem with crypto for a very long time. Is start with technology and then let's find all the applications. So it's why I think a lot of tech companies here as well, yeah, go to fintech, go to payments, um, because those are truly the most and only sectors that are almost entirely digital. Any other, because like I was saying, cash based is huge here. Physical goods, um, things like that. There's always a need for last mile considerations, not just a technology that can just thrive after being deployed. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah,
Depends what
absolutely, absolutely.
technology company, for sure. Um,
Brilliant. Well, this is super insightful, and hopefully this help people maybe break a few preconceptions about the state of technology in Africa and the hunger to participate in the AI revolution and really improve all areas of life and banking through the technology that's available now. So I think you're doing an amazing job over there. I look forward to continue to follow, ping me and follow your experience. And yeah, all the best. And maybe we'll do this again sometime.
awesome. Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, and cut. Okay, so I'll chop everything. I think that was a one taker. I really
Okay.
enjoyed that. That's probably my favorite podcast I've done
I
so
feel
far.
like I didn't explain what we do as a company, but or I never really went
Oh,
into that. But yeah,
we could do that. We could do that, and we could fold it back in if
we
you
could cut
want.
it in.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
we
it
could give
could
it a shot.
go well. I think it could go well with I think it's probably a good thing to end on. Um, if that makes
Right,
sense.
let's roll back into. We'll,
Sorry.
we'll get back into recording mode. And so
Sorry,
Okay,
because I did want to, yeah.
go on.
My,
Tell me.
yeah. Is it recording?
Tell, tell me. No, we're still recording anyway. We're going to chop all this up. But
Ah, okay,
uh,
okay.
so, so you want to talk about what PingMe does as a company? I kind of should have pulled that
Yeah,
question
no
in
worry.
early. Is there anything else?
No, no worries. That's it. That's it. And if you had a few follow-on questions on, our use cases, how we're using, I don't know. You might have some follow-on questions if I explain a bit more.
Right. Okay. So let's do this. Hey, so Rob, tell me about PingMe. Tell me about your business. What is it you do? Who are your customers?
Yeah, so PingMe is a data platform that we provide to financial institutions and enterprises. That allows them to acquire more customer data through alternative means, but also enrich and enhance existing data sources that we have. So we actually started off in Nigeria about 4 years ago, started onboarding microfinance banks, and I'm not the expert to go down a crypto rabbit hole though, if not evident already.
Sure. Well, let's watch this space. I think we're all keeping our eye on it. I think many of the big use cases are still to be proven out. So let's see. I wanted to ask you, what is it like as a startup, as a technology business operating in emerging markets?
What is it like? Yeah, I mean, and this is part of demystified the you know technology has been in emerging markets for a very long time. Um, and I feel like technology doesn't really have borders in a lot of senses. Cloud computing really opens this up to, you've actually enabled a whole ecosystem of developers, of techies to actually build digital solutions, even in countries that don't have these large data centers, that don't have, AWS doesn't have a data center necessarily in Kenya. They have partners and their big infrastructures around the world, but cloud computing has opened that up to be possible here. Um, it is interesting because I think there's some technologies here that I think there's some technology platforms that simply don't take into consideration the context of the market that they're in enough. What I mean by that is like you have, Airbnb uh, is actually they have operations in sub-Saharan Africa. I could Airbnb a condo down the street right now. Is that going to be the best market for Airbnb and the best like tech play? Like, yes, in and around the city of Nairobi, but when you're operating in a market where the consumer purchasing power on 80% of the population isn't in that kind of high income or just, disposable income bracket where these like consumer driven solutions are really able to thrive. I think it's hard. I think like consumer tech is super, super hard. I think it's why a lot of companies go into fintech and financial services because it's actually about providing financial access and strengthening that consumer market. And that's a better case than, trying to get share of wallet for a tech product that isn't necessarily there or available. And that might be a sweeping generalization. I don't mean it to be, but I mean the purchasing power of a market is a key determinant, I think, in, of course, how consumer products are going to be adopted. Um, so, and I think there's a lot of considerations with, when you're putting technology and you're thinking technology first, and you're not actually thinking solution and user consumer first, then that's a problem because then you start kind of implanting a system that you have a thesis that will work because it's technology. Again, this is been my problem with crypto for a very long time. They start with technology and then let's find all the applications. So it's why I think a lot of tech companies here as well, yeah, go to fintech, go to payments, um, because those are truly the most and only sectors that are almost entirely digital. Any other, because like I was saying, cash based is huge here. Physical goods, um, things like that. there's always a need for last mile considerations, not just not just a technology that can just thrive after being deployed. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah,
Depends what
absolutely, absolutely.
depends what technology company, for sure. Um,
Brilliant. Well, this is super insightful, and hopefully this help people maybe break a few preconceptions about the state of technology in Africa, and the hunger to participate in the AI revolution, and really improve all areas of life, and banking through the technology that's available now. So I think you're doing an amazing job over there. I look forward to continue to follow, ping me, and follow your experience. And yeah, all the best, and maybe we'll do this again sometime.
awesome. Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Rob.